Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss why China is concerned about the potential for a UK-US trade deal. Not just the tariff reduction deal announced last month, but the real trade deal still under discussion. But first, for daily news and commentary, please hit the subscribe button to stay notified. So although a mutual tariff reduction deal was announced last month in the Oval Office, and despite Trump hailing it as a comprehensive trade agreement, talks on the wider agreement are still ongoing. There have been numerous sticking points. One of them is, of course, the UK is not prepared to lower our food standards for the deal. Not only would it be stunningly unpopular, it would also scupper plans for the agri-food deal we've just announced with the EU. However, the pendulum has maybe swung back to the Americans. They began by saying they were happy to do a deal with good quality foods. Then Trump wants to push the chlorinated chicken again. Now, according to reports, the Americans are once again saying, well, you know, the crap quality stuff shouldn't be a sticking point because the US is moving away from the low standard food production anyway. I have no idea if that's true, but if Trump is prepared to accept that lower food standards are not going to be part of any serious deal, and Congress continues to do as Trump says, then the prospect for a more credible trade deal still exists. However, another potential feature of the deal is alarming China. See, there's been talk of Trump wanting the UK to agree restrictions on Chinese imports for affected sectors. For example, the US viewed British steel in Scunthorpe with suspicion because it was owned by a Chinese company. The fear was that they were going to use it as like a staging post to funnel cheap Chinese produced steel to America using the UK tariff rate. But because the company, Yingye, forced the government to take control of the plant and have been clear that they will not give up ownership to them or another Chinese company in the future, that's calmed the Americans down. But they want assurances that Britain will not be used for re-exporting and bypassing US tariffs on China. Even though Trump seems to be walking back on his initial tariff plan a bit, it will still be the case that when the dust settles, tariffs on Chinese imports will be higher than on the UK by probably at least 20%. And given that Trump has just announced 50% tariffs on steel, maybe more than for the UK. This provides strong motivation for China to use other countries to bypass those tariffs, but America wants to make sure that that does not happen. So they're trying to use any deals it agrees to close the door on the practice, which is fair enough. China, of course, is not happy because they've done very well out of dodging the previous tariffs by shifting production to other countries, including Mexico. So China is now complaining that the UK should not be agreeing to restrict Chinese imports as part of conditions for a deal with another country. They say that international agreements should not target third countries. However, after a bit of poking around, it would appear the Chinese are dead wrong about this. There is no WTO role against the practice, which is probably why the Chinese referred to their made-up rule as a principle rather than being able to point to something written down. Now, I'm not an expert. Maybe there's something in general guidelines somewhere, but I looked and couldn't find anything and certainly haven't seen anything reported. Also, the UK is basically already breaking WTO rules by giving preferential treatment to EU businesses without a formal agreement on account of our piss-poor levels of checks on their exports to us, although hopefully that should end at some point. That technically disadvantages China as well, but they haven't complained about that. Not much point, really, with neither China nor the US really being the best at enforcing World Trade Organization rules. The WTO seems to be of limited use right now anyway. I suppose for people in Britain, the question is on whose side should we be in on this? Obviously, we've not been impressed with Trump's behaviour. Actually, some of us, I think, have taken some satisfaction in the way that China have seemingly beaten Trump at his own game. That being said, China is hardly a beacon of free trade principles either. In fact, I've said it before, and I'm not the only one. Trump made a bad mistake going to war on trade with the whole world at once. The USA has some genuine grievances against China on the trade front. What Trump could have done, and really should have done, is worked much better with his close trading allies to agree deals which restrict China's ability to bypass tariffs like this. I've even seen it suggested that the EU may well have worked with Trump on this if he'd come to them in the spirit of mutual benefit instead of adversary. Trump could have had much of Europe and North America working with him to corral China and boost trade with one another. But he didn't. He just goes in bullying. I mean, possibly Trump is maybe trying to do some of this belatedly. First with the UK, then maybe Canada, Mexico, the EU. There was a recent announcement from G7 finance ministers that they would move to tackle unfair trade practices from China. That might suggest that Trump is learning that you catch more flies with honey than vinegar. But then he just keeps doubling down on his tariffs. So, we'll see. And this, I think, is why China might be concerned. See, from the UK's point of view, just as the EU is way more important to us than the US because we trade way more with them, well, the US is way more important to us than China because we trade way more with them. We would ideally not like to get in the way of any bun fights, obviously, but if forced to, you side with your biggest trading partner. The reason the government started to soften its criticism of China last November was because they were fully aware of Trump's threats to declare trade wars on the entire world. But of course, if the UK can persuade Trump that if he wants to take on China, he needs allies, and those allies need something in return, well, maybe that's different. After all, Trump is all about the transactional deals, isn't he? It's why he's done a deal with Saudi Arabia, even though they refuse to acknowledge Israel without a commitment to the two-state solution. Trump doesn't give a shit. He didn't even visit Israel on his Middle Eastern tour. He's realised that the war in Gaza is bad for business. Huge arm deals with Saudi Arabia, though. Series of lucrative deals with Syria. Nice posh plane from Qatar. That's what Trump cared about. Even though he's now whining that the Qatari plane is a bit too big. It's why Trump will sometimes do things that are beneficial and sometimes very bad. Morality is not part of his thinking, only profit. So if we can turn the trade talks into an emphasis on profit for him, why not? We could even play one off against the other, couldn't we? What is the US going to offer us for a more wide-ranging deal which secures Britain against cheap Chinese imports? What is China willing to offer to stop it? The main problem, I think, with Trump's brand of transactionalism is that it's for his personal profit. But people sort of expect the same behaviour when the transaction favours the national interest. After all, that's the main job of a government, the national interest. But as Trump's sale of US steel shows, he's not interested in the long-term health of the country or its economy, only short-term benefits to keep him popular. The UK government can maybe learn from that. If you offer Trump something that gives him a quick win, which he can sell to his public, even if it means a bad deal for the US long term, he stands a good chance of taking it. He's very short term in his thinking. That can be exploited. China has a more long-term approach, which is why they will be worried about the potential for major economies to side with the USA against them. Trump is actively trying to work on ways to get other countries to agree to not allow China to simply nearshore by moving production to other countries. But is Trump capable of building this alliance, or will his natural inclination to make an enemy of everyone just get the better of him? But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, please click the like button and subscribe for further content. If you'd like to support the channel further, you can click the join button for memberships. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.